No? Okay. Arjuna uvacha jyayasi chet karmanaste mata buddhir janardana tat kim karmani ghore mam niyojayasi keshava. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. Arjuna said, O Janardhan, O Keshava, why do you want to engage me in this ghastly warfare? If you think that intelligence is better than fruity work. Right? So this is his question. Because if we look at the second chapter, there's so many instances where Krishna talks about Buddhi Yoga, right? Intelligence. I think especially starting around verse 39, right? Buddhi, he specifically refers to that. Buddhi yukto, buddhi yoge, right? So applicate. So and then in subsequent verses also at a couple of places, Krishna is mentioning and emphasizing on bhakti yoga. So here Arjuna is asking, well, I'm confused. What are you saying? Like, you know, if intelligence is ultimately better than fruity work, right? Because you remember what Krishna says, well, one should not be impelled to act or be motivated by material desires, right? To be not be impelled by success or failure. So if ultimately that discrimination is what that matters, then why again I have to act on it? So that is what Arjuna's question is. Can't I just look at things in proper perspective, and once I'm looking at things in proper perspective, and then I can avoid working at all, right? So he's missing the point, as it would be relevant in the later verses. Well, once you have the right perspective, that you have to act on that perspective, right? It's not that you stop acting, right? Otherwise, what's the point in having the right perspective? So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, has very elaborately described the constitution of the soul in the previous chapter. So that is analytical study, right? So here, in the previous chapter, it was referred to as Sankhya Yoga, right? And here it's referred to as, yeah, fruitive action. Yeah, so buddhi, okay. Karmana is referred to as fruitive action here. That means work that is done by work that is done for fruitive reasons, materially motivated. And buddhi refers to where one actually does not act for fruitive reasons. One actually is able to see things in proper perspective, is able to discriminate using intelligence and not be materially motivated. Okay. So yeah, so the very elaborately described the constitution of the soul. So that is also part of analytical study, with the view of delivering his intimate friend Arjuna from the ocean of material grief. And the path of realization has been recommended, Buddhi Yoga or Krishna consciousness. Sometimes Krishna consciousness is misunderstood to be inertia, and one with such a misunderstanding often withdraws to a secluded place to become fully Krishna conscious by chanting the holy names of Lord Krishna. Right. So the Buddhi Yoga here is a common misunderstanding which Arjuna is also being affected by, right? And what is a common misunderstanding? Well, is that you just have to have that perspective, but you're not physically engaged, right? For instance, one understands that, well, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and then one wants to just go to a secluded place, and all they want to do is maybe I'll just read about Krishna or just chant the holy names, right? And so there is a misunderstanding, right? So when we say consciousness, this could be misunderstood as, well, you just need to have your consciousness fixed in Krishna, and as long as you have that, then you don't need to do any work, right? So that's what Arjuna is essentially asking. He said, why do I need to work, right? Why do I need to be engaged in this war if buddhi is what ultimately matters? Buddhi yoga, my consciousness needs to be fixed, and I'll do it. Why I have to engage in war? So Srila Prabhupada is making the clarification. That's a misunderstanding. Without but without being trained in philosophy of Krishna consciousness, it is not advisable to chant the holy names of Krishna in a secluded place, where one may acquire only cheap adoration from innocent public. So, at least there is a segment or class of people who would adores individuals who as tapasvis or sadhus, because they are they're fully dedicated. It is appears like that in the service of Krishna, right? But Srila Prabhupada is saying, well, that is only, one may only get a cheap adoration from innocent public, because they really do not understand what is the nature of a sadhu, how one is situated. Arjuna also thought of Krishna consciousness or Buddhi Yoga or intelligence in spiritual advancement of knowledge as something like retirement from active life and practice of penance and austerity at a secluded place. So this was Arjuna's misunderstanding. When in the previous chapter, Krishna was talking about Buddhi Yoga, he thought that, well, all I have to do is, just think about Krishna and then just retire from active life. In other words, he wanted to skillfully avoid the fighting by using Krishna consciousness as an excuse. But as a sincere student, he was still sincere. So he did not, hey, this fulfills my purpose, and so I'm just going to assume that and move on, right? I am not going to clarify my doubts because, well, you just hear the instructions and we interpret according to our mentality, and then we just act on it. Hey, this fulfills my what I want to do, right? And so sometimes if one is not sincere, even if one approaches a spiritual master, a guru, and then the instructions which are given, either they are misunderstood or misinterpreted because there is a bias in understanding, and if the student is not sincere, then he won't close the loop. He won't clarify that if one's understanding is right or wrong, and he'll say, okay, let me just take this understanding. Maybe if I ask clarification, then the clarification that I might get is something that might not be very pleasing to me, and then I might be forced to act on it. Rather, let me not clarify, right? So that is the symptom of someone who is insincere. But here Arjuna was a sincere student, so he did not just assume. Otherwise, what he would have done is, oh, Krishna is saying Buddhi Yoga. Buddhi Yoga means I just have to look things in proper perspective. I will just apply my intelligence, and so I should not fight and should just go away. But what he's doing is asking clarifying questions. So he placed the matter before his master, his guru, and questioned Krishna as to his best course of action. In answer, Lord Krishna elaborately explained Karma Yoga, or work in Krishna consciousness. So the third chapter is now titled Work in Krishna Consciousness. So that work is, karma is added now, because Buddhi Yoga, Arjuna misunderstood. He was just emphasizing on the Buddhi part of it, right? But once that perspective or the proper intelligence is fixed, one has to act on it, right? So in the third chapter, Krishna will refer Buddhi Yoga as Karma Yoga. And Sankhya Yoga, or the analytical study, is Jnana Yoga, because Sankhya or analytical study is part of knowledge, right? So Krishna is going to use a different term to explain the same concept, because when he used Buddhi Yoga, it's getting misunderstood by Arjuna. And so the third chapter is entitled Karma Yoga, or work in Krishna consciousness, because once the consciousness is properly situated, one needs to act on that consciousness. Any questions on first verse? Okay. Verse number 2. व्यामिश्रेणेव वाक्येन बुद्धिं मोहया शिव मे तद एकं वद निश्चित्य येन श्रेयो अहम् आप्नुयाम्. Translation: my intelligence is bewildered by your equivocal instructions. Therefore, please tell me decisively which will be most beneficial for me. purport. In the previous chapter, as a prelude to Bhagavad Gita, many different paths were explained, right? Because its contents of Bhagavad Gita summarized. There's a lot of concepts that were covered. So Sankhya Yoga, which is analytical study, which Krishna in this chapter will refer to as Jnana Yoga, because analytical study is part of knowledge. And Buddhi Yoga, which he will refer to now as Karma Yoga. Control of senses, this was in the later part of the chapter, if you remember, where Arjuna is asking, what are the symptoms of someone who is properly situated, whose intelligence is situated? And Krishna gives the example that such a person is able to restrain one's senses, is able to control one's senses. So that was discussed. Krishna does introduce the concept of working without fruitive desire, which is yoga, right? And then position of a neophyte. So there was a section where it was Krishna is explaining that one who is not properly situated, fixed, their intelligence is multi-branched. A neophyte, right, is attracted by, has some interest in dharma, but that interest in dharma is again for fruitive reasons. Or there was another section where this could refer to where one is able to restrain the senses from sense object, but the taste for that sense enjoyment still remains because one is still in a neophyte stage, right? One is not sufficiently progressed. So the one is trying to not be engaged in sense enjoyment, the taste still remains. Okay. So this was all presented in an unsystematically in chapter 2. A more organized outline of the path would now be necessary for action and understanding. Arjuna therefore wanted to clear up these apparently confusing matters so that a common man could accept them without misinterpretation, right? There is still a lot of opportunity for things to be misinterpreted. That's why the same concept has to be repeated again and again, and sometimes using different examples, different terminologies, and by such an interaction only all the confusions can be removed. Otherwise, the instructions could be misinterpreted. Although Krishna had no intention of confusing Arjuna by any jugglery of words, Arjuna could not follow the process of Krishna consciousness either by inertia or by active service. It's a very important statement. Krishna didn't want Arjuna to be confused, but Arjuna was not ready, or he was not still out of. Okay, Arjuna could not follow the process of Krishna either by inertia, because what happens is the old habits or the old misunderstandings, they don't go away, right? So that inertia of misunderstanding, because we already have a certain perspective of things and it's not easy to be overcome. So it was not possible for him to correct his understanding easily because of that inertia, or by active service. So here by active service, what is Srila Prabhupada trying to say? Here by active service, Srila Prabhupada is essentially trying to say is that, well, I'm not fully sure. Let me see. It's not anywhere in the verse itself. Let me read that again. Arjuna could not follow the process of Krishna consciousness, either by inertia or by active service. In other words, okay, he is explaining. By his questions, he is clearing the path of Krishna consciousness for all the students who seriously want to understand the mystery of Bhagavad Gita. So active service is basically, sometimes if you, I'm not fully sure, so I think I'm speculating over here, but it could refer to the fact that sometimes you need to start acting on the instructions, and then once you act on it in due course of time, things will become obvious. Like I have examples that I've given in the past, like a child, in the beginning state does not understand the instructions, right? Why I need to do this, for what's the ultimate good from doing this. But in due course of time, if one actually begins, right, to act on it with faith that this is ultimately for my good, but I don't fully understand how it is for my good. But in due course of time, things will become obvious. But let me at least try, right? So that is active service. So you could refer to that. Okay. So in other words, by his questions, yeah, he was clearing the path of Krishna consciousness for all the students who seriously want to understand Bhagavad Gita. So it's also a means that by which Krishna, because we are not present when Bhagavad Gita was spoken. So Arjuna is also clarifying this for posterity, not just for himself. Okay, I think I think there's a couple of comments. The screen hangs in the middle. Is it only for me or for everyone? Is there any others also experiencing any issues? Or in terms of connectivity, Kashyap is having some problems. I cannot hear you, Maulik. Can you say loudly?
Yeah, so from your side, sometimes the screen is freeze.
Oh, is the audio clear though? Is the audio also getting?
Yeah, audio is fine. Even right now, also your screen is freeze.
I don't know. I'm not sure what's happening. I did restart my machine just before the class. So sorry about that. Hopefully, we can continue if the audio is fine.
I think not an issue.
Okay. Okay, any questions on verse number 2? Okay. Verse number 3. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Loke Asmin Vividha Nishtha Pura Prokta Maya Naga Jnana Yogena Sankhyanam Karma Yogena Yoginam. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O sinless Arjuna, I have already explained that there are two classes of men who try to realize the self. Some are inclined to understand it by empirical philosophical speculation, the Jnana Yogis, and others by devotional service or Karma Yoga. So here Krishna, if you look at the Sanskrit, Krishna is now clarifying because he sees what happened. Arjuna is confused. So Sankhya is the word he had used in the previous chapter. So he says those Sankhyanam, those who are doing analytical studies, they're actually engaged in Jnana Yoga. So now he's using a different term. He's saying, okay, what I refer to as Sankhya Yoga or the analytical study, that's part of Jnana Yoga. They were developing a proper perspective, or they are situated in proper knowledge. And then Yoginam. So Yoginam, if you look at the previous chapter, how did Krishna define Yogi? Yogi is one who, yoga is, one is equipoised, one is not motivated by success or failure. And then he elaborates on that. He only mentioned one yoga in the previous chapter, right? So the Sankhya he mentions, right? But he does not mention Sankhya so much in the form of a yoga. Of course, it is a yoga. But he already clarified what is Sankhya, what he meant by Sankhya is Jnana Yoga. Then the other yoga that he mentioned, he is actually referring to the Buddhi Yoga, right? So he's not saying Buddhi Yoga explicitly over here, but that's the only yoga that he has talked about in the previous chapter, right? So there's a Yogi Nam is referring to those who are engaging in Buddhi Yoga. So he's saying that Buddhi Yoga actually is Karma Yoga. So he's making it clear, he's giving that indication to Arjuna that, okay, when I said Buddhi Yoga, I was not saying that, you just discriminate, and having discriminated or analyze, having done that discrimination, you stop acting, you still have to act. That's a hint that Krishna is giving. So now he's saying that there are two kind of individuals. So he actually, what he got confused, the Buddhi yogis, Arjuna got confused that the Buddhi yogis are actually jnanis, who are only looking at things in proper perspective, right? And they are not acting on it. So he confused the Buddhi yogis as jnanis. So you're saying no, those Buddhi yogis are not jnanis. The Buddhi yogis are actually karma yogis. With proper discrimination, they are acting. What you are thinking as jnanis are actually those who are engaged in analytical study, because they are more like armchair philosophers. They analyze things, right? And having done the analysis, they are not devotees actually, right? Because devotees, they want to do active service for satisfaction of Vishnu, as it will be clear in the subsequent verses. So Krishna has not brought that concept yet. He gave some hint, mat paraha, in that one particular verse, but he has not elaborated. And a lot of people, they just like to analyze things and comment on things, right? Talk about sports. I know there are individuals who have never played football, or they are not necessarily pro on it, but they would, in the comfort of their living room, they would watch a game and they would comment. This is how the player should have tackled, or I don't know the terminologies of the football game, but same thing with cricket or any sports. There are parts of the world where people are very passionate about cricket. They might not themselves be necessarily be a good player, but they would not miss an opportunity to analyze uh, the game and say, no, Sachin, he should not have played like this. I think Sachin's retired long time. I think nowadays, I don't know who is the Dhoni. Is he still there? Dhoni, or but anyway, all these cricketers, they would say, well, this is how he should have played, right? This is how he should have played these cover drive or a straight drive, or very quick to comment, right? But we put them on the field, then they might not be, they might not survive even a single ball, right? So it's like that. So there are armchair philosophers who are interested in studying the Vedas or the Vedic scriptures and want to look at things in the perspective, but then they also interpret. And so these are those people who are only interested in liberation. They are not devotees, right? So there are different forms of transcendentalists, right? Those whom the destination is Brahman, right? They just want liberation, and they want to really study and analyze this world. What are the problems in this world? They are using the Vedic knowledge to analyze it, so that is good. They're not speculating, but then they don't have an idea about the absolute truth beyond the Brahman, right? Which is the personality of Godhead. And so they are not devotees. So these are exclusively Sankhya yogis or Jnana yogis, right? So Krishna here is making the distinction over here, that here by karma yoga, when I say buddhi yogis, these are actually karma yogis, right? And then those who are doing analytical study, those are actually Jnana yogis. So don't get confused. That's a hint that Krishna is trying to give to Arjuna over here. That's why he's saying actually there. So now Krishna is taking a step back. He's saying there are two distinct classes of men. Some are only inclined for empirical philosophical speculation. Others are engaged in devotional service. Okay. Now the idea that the work, one has to act on that work. How is it devotional service? I mean, Srila Prabhupada is kind of priming us in advance. Krishna has not really explained this exclusively, right? Karma Yoga is sort of explained so far only in terms of doing duties, doing prescribed duties without being materially motivated. But how that is actually devotional service is not elaborated that, but Srila Prabhupada is priming us in advance. What if somebody never reaches beyond chapter 2? The first chapter of chapter 3, right? So he's giving that knowledge in advance. But in later verses, as we will read in this chapter, it would be obvious that who is the ultimate beneficiary of Karma Yoga. Okay, purport. In the second chapter, verse 39, Lord explained two kinds of procedures, namely Sankhya Yoga and Karma Yoga or Buddhi Yoga. You see? So again, here we are calling it Karma Yoga, but in that verse it was only referred to as Buddhi Yoga. Here Krishna is making that clarification. He's using a different term so that misunderstanding does not come up. So that was in beginning of verse 39. This is where Krishna is telling Arjuna that, hey, so far I have explained you analytical study. Now I am going to explain you things from the perspective of Buddhi Yoga or Karma Yoga. Okay, so in this verse, the Lord explains the same more clearly without confusion. So Sankhya Yoga, or the analytical study, is distinction between the nature of spirit and matter, right? What is matter? What is spirit? What is Brahman? So this is what the Jnanis, they are engaged in neti neti. What is spirit? It's not this. It is not that. It is not this. So by elimination, they said, okay, if it is not this, if it is not this, if it is not this, then what remains, right? So different ways they analyze it. They analyze the 24 elements of matter. They analyze the soul. So Krishna had elaborated on the nature of the soul, right, in the beginning of second chapter. So the Sankhya yogis, or also known as the Jnanis, they are exclusively interested in this topic, right? Just looking at things from that analytical perspective, but they are not actively engaged in devotional service. So this is the subject matter of persons who are inclined to speculate, understand things by experimental knowledge and philosophy. So they take help of the Vedic literature, but then there is speculation also, right, when it comes to spirit, because mostly their understanding of spirit is not complete. Their understanding of spirit is limited to Brahman, and they don't understand the source of the Brahman. And so Srila Prabhupada is saying that though they might be taking the help of the Vedic knowledge, there is room for them. They're engaged in speculations, especially there are some sections of Vedas they are written in a very mystic way, cryptic way, not mystic way, and so could be misunderstood and misinterpreted. Now the other class of men, they work in Krishna consciousness. These are the Buddhi yogis, also referred to as Karma yogis, as it is explained in the 61st verse of the second chapter. So the Buddhi yogis, mostly the chapter is talking about Buddhi yoga, but this is the 61st verse is where Krishna is giving that hint of Buddhi yoga. So Srila Prabhupada is, is making it clear that hint actually will be elaborated later in Bhagavad Gita. Mat paraha, where Krishna is saying that to Arjuna that you should fix your consciousness in me. That is the only time he says that in second chapter. So that is me means Krishna consciousness, right? What does it mean? What does Krishna says? Let's look at that verse 61. He says your consciousness should be fixed in me, and me means who? This is Krishna speaking. That is Krishna. And then consciousness is the word used. That is Krishna consciousness. It's right there. Right. So you read that 60 verse. Matta paraha, in relationship with me. Here me refers to Krishna consciousness. Me refers to Krishna. Krishna is speaking, right? So relationship with Krishna, that is Krishna consciousness. So that is that's what Srila Prabhupada is translating that. And so this is that verse 61 does not come out of the blue. I mean, it is in relationship with everything that is discussed so far in the context of Buddhi Yoga, right? And so that's why Buddhi Yoga refers to, as it will be elaborately explained, is the ultimate purpose of acting in Buddhi Yoga, doing that karma, has to connect with Krishna, right? So that hint is given. It's not obvious, but now Krishna will make it obvious in the subsequent verses. So Lord has explained also in the 39th verse that by working in principles of Buddhi Yoga or Krishna consciousness, one can be relieved from the bonds of action. And furthermore, there is no flaw in this process. This is the byproduct, right? So, that happens naturally, but what is the ultimate objective? Well, the ultimate objective is satisfaction of Krishna. And the fact that one is not affected by reactions of such an activity is the byproduct. That's not the motivation. Motivation is to please or satisfy Krishna. Same principle is more clearly explained in the 61st verse. That is, Buddhi Yoga is to depend entirely on the Supreme, or specifically on Krishna. Right? Mat paraha. I mean, it can be, there's no question of interpretation. Krishna is saying to me. And in this way, the senses can also be brought under control very easily. You see, if you go to the source, everything is automatically taken care of. One is free from the reactions. One is not motivated by success or failure, and the senses are also automatically controlled. One does not have to pursue all these three things separately. Therefore, both yogas are interdependent, you see. So Arjuna was trying to look at Buddhi Yoga as an exclusive category from the karma yoga, right? And there are certain class of men, who are missing that point, and so that's the reason they are engaged. They think Jnana yoga is exclusive of karma yoga. That's why they become armchair philosophers. But ultimate objective of Jnana yoga is also, after having analyzed, one has to act on it. And so Srila Prabhupada makes here a very, very important point, which he does mention also in the introduction to Bhagavad Gita, where we discuss, where he's saying that just like religion and philosophy, they are dependent, they are not independent, right? Similarly, the Buddhi yoga and a Jnana yoga, they are also interdependent. So what is the dependence between religion and philosophy? Anyone recalls? In the introduction we did, Srila Prabhupada makes this statement in introduction also. Well, the statement he makes in introduction is repeating here again, which is saying religion without philosophy is only sentiment, right? Because people might be attracted to performing rituals. Why? Because their father used to do it, or the grandfather used to do it, and they feel homely. They feel this is a part of their identity, but they don't have the philosophical understanding, right? So what does that happen? It's only sentimental. So I'm doing some puja, some yajna, some homam. I don't fully understand why is it done, what's the purpose, but it's a kind of a homely feeling. It's part of my identity, and everyone in my family did. So it's some sentiment. So doing those rituals without understanding the philosophy, it's only sentiment. On the other hand, sentiment, or if it is benign, then it is a sentiment. But sometimes if some of the things could be very fanatical also, right? There could be some instruction in the scriptures not properly understood, and one takes it literally and acts on it, and could be extreme, as we see in certain faiths, right? Those actions could be, and those extremist actions come out as fanaticism. So what is the flip side? The flip side is that, well, there are individuals who are only engaged in philosophy, right? And they might have a good philosophical understanding based on scriptures, but then they don't act on it, right? That means, you're just like, if my child is hungry and says, I said, oh, you're so hungry, I can totally understand your hunger, and I have full empathy towards you, and you might analyze that. But if I don't cook for my child, right, then what's the point of having that empathy? One needs to act on it. Or like sometimes a lover would express the feelings of love to one's beloved, and if those words are not backed by action, and real tangible action, when the beloved really needs any help or any support, or then it's just empty words, right? So while philosophy without religion is mental speculation. So these are the two aspects, right? And they are interdependent. So it's not that one can only engage in religion and not philosophy, or vice versa. It doesn't help. Similarly, the Buddhi yoga and Karma yoga, they are not exclusive, right? You really cannot do Karma yoga if one does not have proper perspective or knowledge, Buddhi, right? And then having developed the proper perspective, one does not act on it, then that is also not helpful. So that's the point Arjuna was missing. So ultimate goal of is Krishna, because the philosophers who are also sincerely searching after absolute truth come in the end to Krishna consciousness. So those who are engaged in Jnana Yoga, and if they are sincere, they will come to the conclusion that ultimately the truth is Krishna consciousness. This is also stated in Bhagavad Gita. The whole process is to understand the real position of the self in relation to the Supreme. So that is what the verse 61 of the previous chapter was. Krishna is saying Mat Paraha, right? The indirect process in philosophical speculation by which gradually one may come to the point of Krishna consciousness, and the other process is directly connecting everything with Krishna in Krishna consciousness. So there are two processes, right? Well, the path of action is, or karma yoga is more direct, because one is, right? So one might study for a long time, right? But if one does not act on it, then what happens is it just becomes a bookish knowledge. On the other hand, one might start acting on it and acquires knowledge while doing the job, where the right. So on hands knowledge, like, if we when we work in organizations, there we might have studied engineering, but we might not have studied business, for example, right? Or vice versa. That doesn't mean I have to go to school to learn everything, but there are other things that are like accounting. I never went to an accounting class, for instance, or a finance class, but having worked for for so many years in the industry, you understand concepts of accounting. So this is knowledge that is acquired in due course of executing one's action, right? So that is more direct. I don't have to spend 2 years going to college again to learn accounting, right? It's not needed. So that is a more direct path, right? But ultimately, so those who, one might begin acting without knowledge, right? So the thing with karma yoga is that initially one might not have knowledge, but that knowledge will be developed in due course of time. So it's not that one has to develop the knowledge first and then you start acting on it. So that is a gradual process, right? The other process is much faster and direct but the key is that one still has to acquire the knowledge, right? It's just might happen simultaneously or after the fact that one has started acting. So in that sense, karma yoga is faster. So of these two paths, the path of Krishna consciousness, karma yoga, is better because it is not dependent on purifying the senses by philosophical process. It's, you don't have to wait until one has completely developed a proper perspective of the reality, one has purified one's senses. Krishna consciousness is itself the purifying process, right? So the means itself is the end, right? So what's the goal of chanting Hare Krishna? To be able to chant more Hare Krishna, right? So the means and the end are the same. So it's not separate. Just by engaging in that devotional activity, everything else falls in place. And by this direct method of devotional service, it is simultaneously very easy and sublime. Okay. Any questions on verse number 3? No? Okay. I see some of you need to drop at 6:30 sharp. We have 9 minutes. I think we might be able to cover 1 or 2 verses. Unless somebody has questions, I think we can cover 2 more verses. Let's see. I don't intend to continue the class much longer. Okay, verse number 4. Na karmanam anarambhan naiskarmyan puruso asnute nacha sanyasanadeva siddhim samadhi gacchati. Translation: not by merely abstaining from work can one achieve freedom from reaction, nor by renunciation alone can one attain perfection. It's a very important point, because Krishna could sense that Arjuna ultimately wants to avoid acting or executing his duty. So he's saying that, okay, it's not that, well, if you're just going to analyze things in proper perspective, you're not going to act. That doesn't mean that you'll be free from reaction, right? You remember what verse was this in which, well, Krishna says that what is night for others is day for the yogi, and what is day for the others is night for the yogis, right? So what it means is that, even what is day for others is night for the yogis. So what is reaction for others, karmic reaction, when they are actively engaged, right? They are actively engaged because day means day is when all the activities happen, right? So everyone is acting, and because of their actions, they are getting reactions. Could be good, could be bad. But a yogi, because that yogi is properly situated in knowledge and proper perspective, even when that yogi is acting, externally it might appear just like any other ordinary man, but that individual is not subject to karmic reaction, and in that sense it is night for them. On the other hand, when everyone ceases activities, right, in the night, and so yogi might also be sitting idle. It might appear that the yogi is also idle, but actually when the yogi, his mind is engaged in remembering and meditating Krishna, and so that is positive action. So physical, so the just the so what is the essence of this verse, right, that we did last time? The essence of this verse is that ultimately the externality in itself does not matter. Ultimately the consciousness matters, right? Even if I'm doing physical activity just like any other ordinary man, if my consciousness is proper, then I am not affected by the reactions. Similarly, vice versa, the karmis who are if they are abstaining from work, if they still have the taste for sense enjoyment, even if they are not physically engaged in activity of sense gratification or pursuit of a fruitive activity, because their mind is surcharged by material desires, they are accruing karma just by their thoughts, right? So that's why here Krishna is saying that it's not that because you're going to abstain from work you will be free from reaction. That's not possible. And if you take sannyas, just simply by renunciation, one cannot attain perfection. So by artificially renouncing things. So this is temporary, right? I mean, I might be abstained from work, but sannyas means you are completely giving up. And so it's not that by giving, by taking sannyas, one attains perfection. It's not that. But having attained perfection, one can take sannyas. You see, it's the other way around, right? Just by formally taking sannyas, it's not that one achieves perfection, but one who has achieved perfection, one who has realized the absolute truth, for that individual has no need to continue being engaged in the prescribed duties. One might still do it. Just to set an example, like Bhishma Pitama, right? He had no reason to continue doing it, but he was completely aloof. But then he went on to do his prescribed duties, right? So having attained perfection, one can take sannyas, but it's not that by renunciation itself one will achieve perfection. So that is the sum and substance of this verse. So let's read the purport, and I think we will end there. Only have 5 minutes. So the renounced order of life can be accepted when one has been purified by the discharge of prescribed form of duties, which are laid down just to purify the hearts of materialistic men. You see, so here the same point Srila Prabhupada is mentioning, right? That the sannyas can be accepted, those who have actually purified in their previous ashram. Before sannyas, you have vanaprastha, grihastha ashram, brahmachari ashram. In all their ashrams, they have performed their prescribed duties, right? And then by performance of those activities, their hearts have been purified. Without purification, one cannot attain the success by abruptly adopting the fourth order of life, or sannyas. According to empirical philosophers, simply by adopting sannyas or retiring from fruitive activities, one at once becomes as good as Narayana. So this is what the jnanis, right? So those who are exclusively engaged in jnana yoga, which is disconnected from bhakti yoga, because the bhakti yoga dimension is missing, they are very prone to misinterpretation and misunderstanding. So the common misunderstanding that they have is that by adopting sannyas, as soon as one adopts sannyas, one becomes as good as Narayana, right? Why Narayana? Because their idea of Narayana is that Narayana is a manifestation of Brahman, that from the Brahman, which is impersonal, the personality of Narayana comes. What is the Vaishnava understanding? The first is Narayana, the personality, and from that personality, the impersonal aspect of Brahman comes, right? So because the empirical philosophers, the jnanis, they are missing the devotional dimension. They miss this very important point, and they're often prone to misinterpretation. So here is one misinterpretation or misunderstanding, is that By adopting sannyas, one becomes as good as Narayana. But Lord Krishna does not approve this principle. He says, without purification of heart, sannyas is simply a disturbance to the social order. So what happens is, many imposters will take up sannyas. They will falsely act as sadhu, right, or a sannyasi, but they are not really suited to take up that order of life, renounced order of life. On the other hand, if someone takes transcendental service of the Lord, even without discharging one's prescribed duties, whatever he may be able to advance in the cause is accepted by the Lord. That is Buddhi Yoga. Right? So when one is executing one's prescribed duties, and by such an execution, one purifies one heart, and that is in the right path, and there is immediate path, because that activity is directly in the service of the Lord, right? So one is making progress. Even if someone takes transcendental service of the Lord, even without discharging his prescribed duties, whatever he may be able to advance is the cause is accepted by the Lord. So here Srila Prabhupada is making an exception. He's saying, well, ideally one should take up prescribed duties, not somebody else's duties. But for whatever reason, one is not situated, right? But at least one is serving the Lord, right? So at least the connection with Krishna is there, and so that is important. Because one is not simply sitting as an armchair philosopher. One is taking to service, right? Transcendental service of the Lord. Swalpam api asya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat. So we did that in the previous chapter. But just by making a little endeavor on this principle, one is protected from the great danger. And what is the great danger? The great danger is the danger of falling or degrading into lower species of life, because one has made some progress in devotional services. This is the understanding of the 4th verse of Bhagavad, 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which is titled Karma Yoga, or Action in Krishna Consciousness. Any questions on this? Okay, if there are no more questions, I think we can end today's session. One thing, before I forget, so there's a daylight is going to turn on starting tomorrow. So I think the only person would be impacted would be Maulik. He's in Australia.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to bring it to your attention. So right now it's 6:30. So spring forward, the clock will go 1 hour. So this time, right now it is 6:30 p.m. here. The same time would be, the clock would show 7:30 p.m. Right. We'll continue the class at the same time from 5 to 6:30. Right. So our time is not going to change, but the clock for you, I think you might be 1 hour closer. You still have to flip. You can do that.
I think what would happen, not from now, but from first week of April, we will have a 2 hours of difference.
So you are also changing your daylight first week of April?
First week of April.
Okay. So then I think it will. Oh, because you are in the southern hemisphere, so you would flip the other way. So okay.
Yeah.
So you are changing, but you're changing in the opposite.
So what happened initially when we started? It was like for me 10 a.m. in the morning, and right now it is 12 a.m. in the morning. 12 p.m. basically. So
it
will go back to 10 o'clock again. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to bring to your attention. I think everyone else should be fine. In US, I think all of them are switching the clocks. No one is in Arizona. Arizona is one odd state which does not change their clocks. Okay. Okay, so if there are no more questions, thank you everybody. Hare Krishna. We'll see you all next week.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.